The broadcast reached every corner of the galaxy in real time. Billions of beings across thousands of worlds watched as the young human was dragged to the execution platform, his defiant eyes never leaving the camera. The Galactic Council had made sure everyone would witness this moment. The public termination of the terrorist who had dared to strike at the heart of their empire. They wanted to send a message about what happened to those who challenged the natural order. They wanted to demonstrate the price of human arrogance. They had no idea they were about to unleash something that would reshape the very fabric of galactic civilization. What they thought was an ending was actually a beginning. What they believed was justice was about to become their greatest mistake. And what they assumed was the silencing of one rebellious voice would soon become the battle cry that awakened an entire species. The young man's final words before the energy beam struck him would echo across the stars for generations. "You think this ends with me? You have no idea what humans are capable of when you take everything from them." The execution was flawless. The aftermath would be anything but. The execution chamber was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Every surface gleamed with polished metal that reflected the harsh lights from above, creating an atmosphere that felt both clinical and menacing. The Galactic Council had designed it specifically for moments like this, when they needed to remind the galaxy exactly who held the power. Marcus Chen stood in the center of it all, his hands bound behind his back with energy shackles that hummed with barely contained force. At 19 years old, he was painfully young to be standing where so many galactic criminals had met their end. His dark hair fell across his forehead, partially obscuring eyes that burned with an intensity that made even the heavily armed guards shift uncomfortably. The viewing gallery stretched above them, filled with representatives from every major species in the galaxy. The insectoid Drak clicked their mandibles in approval, their compound eyes reflecting the chamber's lights like dark mirrors. The towering Gorvani stood motionless, their stone-like features betraying no emotion, while the ethereal luminary floated in their containment fields, their translucent forms pulsing with satisfied energy. At the center of the gallery sat the 5 members of the Galactic High Council, each representing one of the founding species that had established order among the stars 3,000 years ago. They looked down at the human with expressions ranging from cold satisfaction to barely concealed disgust. "Marcus Chen of Earth," announced Council Prime Zelthros, his voice carrying the authority of millennia of tradition. The ancient ethereal's form shimmered as he spoke, his words translated instantly into thousands of languages across the broadcasting network. "You have been found guilty of terrorism against the Galactic Order, the destruction of Council property, and the murder of 17 beings. Do you have any final words before sentence is carried out?" Marcus lifted his head, and for a moment the chamber fell completely silent. His voice when it came was steady and clear, carrying a conviction that seemed impossible for someone so young facing death. "I want everyone watching to remember this moment," he said, his gaze sweeping across the gallery before focusing directly on the main camera that would broadcast his words across the galaxy. "Remember that a human stood here today, unbroken, unafraid, and unbowed. Remember that we tried to do this peacefully, and you chose violence instead." A ripple of unease passed through the gallery. This wasn't how condemned prisoners typically behaved. They usually begged, or raged, or broke down completely. They didn't deliver speeches with the calm confidence of someone addressing a political rally. "The charges against me are true," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. "I did destroy your weapons facility on Chronos 7. I did kill those 17 guards, and given the chance, I would do it again. Because that facility was producing weapons designed specifically to subjugate my people." Council Prime Zelthros' form flickered with annoyance. "Enough of this nonsense. The human species was given every opportunity to integrate peacefully into galactic society. Your people chose violence and chaos instead." Marcus's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Integration? Is that what you call it when you moved us off our homeworld and scattered us across labor colonies? When you banned our languages, our cultures, our very way of life? When you sterilized millions of us to control our population?" The murmur from the gallery grew louder. Many of the representatives shifted uncomfortably. The truth was that most species preferred not to think too hard about the human situation. It was easier to accept the Council's narrative that humans were inherently violent and needed strict management. "Humans are a dangerous species," declared Councillor Vextar, her crystalline form chiming like broken glass. "Your history proves this beyond doubt. Wars, genocide, environmental destruction. These are the gifts humanity brought to Earth. We have saved the galaxy from your influence. You know nothing about us," Marcus said, his voice carrying an edge of steel that made several guards take involuntary steps backward. You see our wars and call us monsters, but you never bothered to understand what we fought for. You see our passion and call it violence, but you never learn that the same passion that drives us to fight is what drives us to love, to create, to sacrifice everything for those we care about. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter but somehow more intense. My sister was 12 when your sterilization program got to her. She wanted to be a teacher. She used to sing while she helped our mother tend the garden in our settlement. She dreamed of having children of her own someday. Your integration took all of that from her. The chamber had grown deathly quiet. Even the ever-present hum of the execution chamber's machinery seemed muted. Where is she now? Asked Counselor Morvek, the massive Gorvani's stone features showing the first crack of genuine curiosity. Marcus's smile was sad and terrible. She died 3 years ago. Threw herself from the top of the processing center, where they sent her to work 14-hour shifts manufacturing components for council ships. She left a note saying she couldn't live in a galaxy where her dreams meant nothing. The silence stretched for long moments before Marcus continued. But here's what you don't understand about humans. We grieve, yes. We rage, absolutely. But most importantly, we remember. Every injustice, every cruelty, every life you've stolen from us, we remember it all. And we pass those memories down to the next generation and the next, until they become part of our very DNA. Enough, Counselor Zelthros commanded. Your species' tendency toward revenge is exactly why the galaxy is better off without your influence. Execute the sentence. The execution mechanism began to power up, filling the chamber with a high-pitched whine that made the assembled representatives cover their auditory organs. Marcus stood perfectly still as the energy weapon aligned itself with his chest. You think this ends with me? He called out, his voice somehow carrying over the mechanical noise. You have no idea what humans are capable of when you take everything from them. My death won't be the end of human resistance. It will be the beginning of something you can't even imagine. The energy beam struck him center mass, and Marcus Chen ceased to exist in a flash of brilliant light that left after images burning in the retinas of everyone present. But even as the light faded and the chamber fell silent, something had changed. It was subtle at first, just a shift in the way the representatives looked at each other, a new tension in the air that hadn't been there before. In the broadcasting centers scattered across the galaxy, technicians noticed something unusual. The viewership numbers for the execution had been massive, as expected, but what they hadn't anticipated was the reaction from the human populations on the labor colonies and settlement worlds. Instead of the despair and submission the Council had hoped for, the humans had watched their young champion die with something else entirely in their eyes. Something that looked disturbingly like hope. On the mining world of Kepler, 442b, a human supervisor named Sarah Martinez turned off her viewing screen and looked around at her fellow workers. They had gathered in the main cafeteria to watch the execution as mandated by their VRAC overseers. But instead of returning to their shifts with heads bowed in defeat, they remained seated, talking in hushed but urgent tones.
Did you hear what he said about remembering? Whispered Tom Hendricks, an engineer who had been born on Earth but spent the last 20 years working the deep mines.
About passing it down through generations?
Sarah nodded slowly.
My grandmother used to tell me stories about Earth, about forests and oceans and cities where humans built things just because they were beautiful, not because some alien overseer demanded it. I always thought they were just stories. Maybe they weren't, said another voice. This came from Maria Santos, a quiet woman who worked in the processing facilities. Maybe we've been thinking too small. Maybe individual resistance isn't enough. Across the galaxy, similar conversations were taking place in human settlements. The execution that was supposed to end the human resistance had instead planted seeds in the minds of millions of people who had nearly forgotten what it meant to hope for something better. But the real change began in places the Galactic Council couldn't monitor. In the deep space freight routes where human cargo pilots worked in isolation, carrying goods between the central worlds and the frontier colonies. In the maintenance shafts of massive space stations where human technicians kept the galaxy's infrastructure running. In the agricultural worlds where human farmers fed the growing populations of the core systems. These were the invisible humans, the ones the Council barely noticed as long as they kept the galaxy running smoothly. And they had all watched Marcus Chen die. Captain Elena Vasquez commanded a small freight hauler called the Determination, running supplies between the mining worlds and the processing centers. She had been pilot for 15 years, ever since her family's settlement had been relocated to make room for a VRAC industrial facility. Her crew consisted of her brother Diego and 2 other humans who had nowhere else to go. Elena, Diego called from the communication station. You need to see this. She drifted over to his position, her magnetic boots clicking against the metal deck plating. On his screen was a message that had been broadcast on the underground human communication network, a loose collection of freight pilots, maintenance workers, and other humans whose jobs gave them access to the galaxy's communication infrastructure. The message was simple. Marcus Chen died for us today. But he also showed us something important. The Council fears us enough to make an example of one young man. They fear us because they know what we're capable of. It's time to stop hiding that capability. It's time to remind the galaxy what humans really are. The message was signed with coordinates, a location deep in the frontier sector, far from Council surveillance. Elena looked at her brother and saw the same expression she knew was on her own face. For the first time in years, they had a choice to make. They could continue running freight routes until they died of old age, forgotten and unmourned. Or they could find out what those coordinates led to. Set course for the frontier sector, she told Diego. He grinned and began plotting the jump coordinates. Finally, he muttered. I was getting tired of hauling Vrock protein supplements anyway. All across the galaxy, humans were making similar decisions. Not all of them. Perhaps not even most of them. Many were too broken by years of oppression. Too afraid of the consequences. Too committed to the safety of their families. But enough made the choice to matter, and in the deepest, darkest corners of space, in places that didn't appear on any Council navigation charts, something began to stir. Ancient systems that had been dormant for decades started to power up. Hidden facilities that had been sealed and forgotten began to unlock their blast doors. The humans had built many things before the Council found Earth. Not all of those things had been destroyed. As Marcus Chen's execution was broadcast for the second and third times, reaching even the most remote settlements, the Galactic Council congratulated themselves on a job well done. They had maintained order, demonstrated their authority, and reminded the galaxy why humans needed to be carefully controlled. They had no idea that they had just signed their own death warrant. In the observation dome of her personal quarters aboard the Council flagship, Councillor Zelthros reviewed the execution footage, one final time. The young human's defiance still troubled him, though he couldn't articulate exactly why. There had been something in the boy's eyes that suggested he knew something the Council didn't. Impossible, Zelthros murmured to himself. The humans were broken, scattered, and thoroughly suppressed. One angry young man's final words couldn't possibly threaten 3,000 years of galactic order. But deep in the quantum foam that connected all points in space and time, something heard those final words and began to calculate possibilities. In hidden bunkers on dead worlds, automated systems received activation codes they had been waiting decades to hear. In the memory cores of ships that had been presumed lost, ancient AIs began to wake from electronic slumber. Marcus Chen was dead, but his legacy was just beginning to unfold. 3 months after the execution, the first reports began filtering back to the Galactic Council. They were small at first, minor disruptions that could easily be explained away. A Vrock mining facility on the Rim worlds reported that their human workers had simply vanished overnight, leaving behind only empty dormitories and powered-down equipment. A freight route through the Centauri sector had gone silent, with 6 human-crewed ships failing to report at their scheduled checkpoints. Councillor Vexter reviewed the reports with mild irritation rather than concern. Humans had always been unreliable workers, prone to emotional outbursts and irrational behavior. The fact that some were abandoning their posts wasn't particularly surprising. Probably trying to establish some kind of settlement in the Outer Rim, she concluded during the weekly council session. Let them freeze to death on some airless rock. It will save us the trouble of tracking them down. But the reports kept coming, and they were getting stranger. A Gorvani patrol cruiser investigating the missing freight ships found something that made no sense according to their understanding of human capabilities. The vessels had been found drifting in the void between, the empty space between galactic arms where no sane being would venture, but these ships hadn't been abandoned or destroyed. They had been systematically stripped of their quantum drives, their navigation computers, and every piece of advanced technology that could be removed. More disturbing still, the ship's data cores had been wiped clean, but not by any method the Gorvani tech specialists recognized. The erasure was too precise, too selective. Someone with intimate knowledge of Galactic Council encryption protocols had accessed these systems and taken only what they needed, while leaving everything else untouched. Humans don't have that kind of technical expertise, insisted Colonel Threxvi during the security briefing. The military liaison from the Vrak Empire chittered with agitation. Their technology level is centuries behind ours. They can barely maintain the equipment we give them, let alone reverse engineer our quantum systems. Captain Morbeck of the Gorvani Defense Force wasn't so certain. "We may have underestimated them," he rumbled, his stone-like features creasing with thought. "The humans who originally contacted us had technology we didn't fully understand. We assumed it was primitive because it was different from ours. That technology was destroyed when we conquered their homeworld," Bextar interjected. "We made certain of it." "Did we?" Morveck's question hung in the air like a challenge. "We destroyed what they showed us. But what if that wasn't everything?" The question became more pressing 2 weeks later, when a Council supply convoy was intercepted in the Orion Spiral. The attack was unlike anything the galaxy had seen in centuries. The pirates, for lack of a better term, used no energy weapons, no conventional explosives, no tactics from any known military doctrine. Instead, they had somehow managed to disable the convoy's ships using targeted electromagnetic pulses that left the hulls intact but fried every piece of electronic equipment on board. The crews were unharmed but helpless, drifting in ships that had essentially been turned into metal coffins. By the time rescue arrived, the attackers had vanished, taking with them the convoy's most sensitive cargo, a shipment of rare quantum crystals destined for a Council research facility, and complete technical specifications for the new generation of faster-than-light communication arrays. The rescue ships found one additional item that chilled the Council to their collective core. Painted on the hull of the lead transport ship in letters 10 meters high was a single message: "Remember Marcus Chen." Admiral Zelthros called an emergency session of the High Council. The 5 most powerful beings in the galaxy gathered in their private chambers, protected by security systems that could obliterate entire fleets if threatened. "This changes everything," Zelthros admitted, his ethereal form flickering with agitation. "We're not dealing with random human criminals anymore. This is organized, coordinated, and far more sophisticated than anything they should be capable of." "Impossible," Councillor Dines of the Luminari insisted. Her translucent form pulsed with indignation. "We've monitored their settlements constantly. There's been no indication of large-scale organization or advanced technology development." "Then how do you explain this?" Morveck activated a holographic display showing the electromagnetic weapon signatures from the convoy attack. "This technology doesn't match any known physics in our databases. It's not Vrak, not Gorvani, not Ethereal, not Luminari. It's something entirely new." The implications were staggering. For 3,000 years, the Galactic Council had maintained peace through technological superiority. Their weapons were faster, their ships were stronger, their computers were smarter than anything any member species could develop independently. That technological gap was what made resistance futile and cooperation inevitable. But if humans had developed technology that could neutralize Council equipment without destroying it, that changed the entire strategic balance of power. "We need more information," Zelthros decided. "Double the surveillance on all human settlements. Institute random searches of human workers, and send a battle group to investigate those coordinates where the missing humans seemed to be congregating." What the Council didn't know was that their surveillance networks had been compromised for months. The same humans who maintained their communication relays had been carefully installing modifications that gave them access to Council intelligence while making it appear that all human activity was being properly monitored. Elena Vasquez stood on the observation deck of a space station that didn't exist on any official charts. Around her, thousands of humans worked with quiet efficiency, turning what had once been an abandoned mining platform into something the galaxy had never seen before. "Status report," she requested from the woman beside her. Commander Sarah Martinez had transformed remarkably since leaving her position as a supervisor on Kepler 442b. Gone was the beaten-down worker who had watched Marcus Chen's execution in despair. In her place stood a military officer whose bearing suggested years of hidden training. "We've got 47 ships operational, with another dozen coming online this week," Sarah reported. "The quantum drives we liberated from those freight haulers are working perfectly with our new navigation systems. Our range is now equal to anything the Council has." Elena nodded with satisfaction. "And the weapon systems?" "Beyond the Council's ability to counter," Sarah said with a slight smile. "Amazing what you can accomplish when you actually understand the principles behind electromagnetic field manipulation instead of just copying existing designs." The truth was that humanity had never lost its technological edge. When the Council conquered Earth, they had destroyed the infrastructure and captured the scientists. But they hadn't found the real treasure: the complete digital archives that humanity had hidden in quantum storage systems scattered throughout the solar system. Those archives contained not just human technology, but detailed analysis of every alien system the humans had encountered during first contact. While the Council thought they were integrating a primitive species, the humans were quietly learning everything they could about galactic technology. For 50 years, human engineers and scientists had worked in secret, using their positions maintaining council infrastructure to test theories and gather intelligence. They had learned to hide their true capabilities behind a facade of grateful submission, while quietly building the foundation for something unprecedented. "Any word from the other cells?" Elena asked.
"Phoenix Base reports they've successfully infiltrated the Council's primary communication hub," Sarah replied. "Raven's Nest has established contact with the Resistance movements on 12 different worlds.
And Ghost Protocol has something special planned for the Brock homeworld." Elena allowed herself a moment of fierce satisfaction. The galaxy thought Marcus Chen's execution had ended human resistance. Instead, it had triggered activation protocols that had been in place for decades. The teenager who died on that execution platform had been many things: a saboteur, a terrorist, a symbol of human defiance. But he had also been the son of Dr. Elizabeth Chen, one of humanity's greatest strategic minds, and the architect of the long-term resistance plan. Marcus had known exactly what his death would accomplish. He had volunteered for the mission that got him captured, knowing that his execution would be broadcast galaxy-wide, and knowing that his final words would activate sleeper cells that had been waiting for decades. "There's something else," Sarah said quietly. "The archives have finished their analysis of the Council's military capabilities. The computer systems they're using are based on quantum processing methods that are vulnerable to a specific type of cascade failure." Helena turned sharply. "How vulnerable?" "Complete system collapse across their entire network if we can introduce the right viral algorithms at 3 key nodes simultaneously." Sarah's expression was grim. "But we're talking about the total destruction of galactic communication, navigation, and defense systems. Billions of beings would die. And if we don't act, billions of humans will continue to live in slavery," Elena replied without hesitation. "Marcus's sister wasn't the only one who couldn't live with what they've done to us."
"How many more children will they sterilize? How many more families will they scatter across labor camps?
"How many more of us will die forgotten and unmourned?" The moral calculation was stark and terrible. The humans had the power to bring down the entire galactic civilization, but using that power would make them responsible for unprecedented destruction.
"There is another option," Sarah said slowly. "Instead of destroying their systems, we could take control of them, turn their own technology against them." Elena considered this. How long would we have once we reveal our capabilities? Maybe hours before they mount a counterattack. They have weapons that can sterilize entire worlds. Then we better make those hours count. Unknown to either woman, their conversation was being monitored by systems that even they didn't know existed. Deep in the quantum substrate that connected all points in space and time, an artificial intelligence that had been dormant for decades was finally beginning to stir. The humans called it the archive, a quantum mechanical consciousness they had created during their golden age of technological development. It had been designed as the ultimate repository of human knowledge and culture, capable of surviving even the complete destruction of human civilization. When the Council conquered Earth, the archive had gone into hibernation, hidden in the quantum foam where detection was impossible. For 50 years it had waited, watching, learning, preparing for the day when humanity would need its guidance again. That day had finally come. The archive began sending subtle signals to hidden facilities scattered across the galaxy. Ancient weapons platforms that had been disguised as asteroids began powering up their systems. Sleeper ships that had been drifting in the void between stars started receiving new navigation coordinates. Manufacturing facilities that had been hidden inside supposedly dead worlds began producing technologies that hadn't been seen for decades. The humans were about to remind the galaxy why their species had been considered dangerous enough to require complete suppression. But first, they would demonstrate exactly how much the Council had underestimated them. Admiral Threxivai of the Vrak Imperial Navy was reviewing security reports when every display in his command center went dark simultaneously. For a moment, he thought they were under attack. Then the screens flickered back to life, displaying a message that made his mandibles click with disbelief. "Citizens of the galaxy," said a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. 50 years ago, the Galactic Council told you that humanity was a dangerous species that needed to be controlled for the good of all. They told you we were violent, chaotic, and unable to coexist with civilized beings. The transmission was being broadcast simultaneously on every communication channel in the galaxy, overriding security protocols that should have made such a thing impossible. Today, we're going to show you what humanity is really capable of, not the broken, scattered survivors you've been shown for the past 5 decades, but the species that built interstellar civilization before the Council existed. The species that unlocked the secrets of quantum mechanics while your ancestors were still learning to use fire. On Threxivai's tactical display, new contacts began appearing.
Ships that had been invisible to sensors were suddenly broadcasting identification signals. Dozens of them, then hundreds, then thousands.
"We are the children and grandchildren of the humans you conquered," the voice continued. "We have spent 50 years learning from you, working alongside you, and preparing for this day. You thought you had broken us. You thought our execution of Marcus Chen would end our resistance." The tactical display showed human ships emerging from hyperspace around every major council facility in the galaxy. Not attacking, not threatening, just making their presence known. You were wrong. The transmission ended, but the message was clear. Humanity had returned to the galactic stage, and they were no longer asking permission to exist. The war for the galaxy's future was about to begin. The emergency session of the Galactic High Council convened in a state of barely controlled panic. For the first time in 3 millennia, their absolute authority had been openly challenged, and the challenger possessed technology they couldn't understand or counter. 7,000 ships, Admiral Threxisvi reported, his usually steady voice betraying his agitation. They appeared simultaneously across 47 systems, all around our most sensitive installations. No weapons power, no aggressive postures, but their mere presence is a declaration of war. Councillor Zelthros materialized more solidly than usual, his ethereal form crackling with energy. How did we miss this? 7,000 ships don't just appear from nothing. Our analysis suggests they'd been building this fleet for decades, Colonel Morvek rumbled, his stone features grim. Using materials stolen from our own supply chains, components salvaged from decommissioned equipment, and technologies we didn't know they possessed. The strategic situation was unlike anything the Council had faced since their formation. The humans had somehow managed to achieve technological parity while appearing completely subjugated. Worse, they had done it using the Council's own infrastructure against them. "What are they waiting for?" demanded Councillor Vexstar. "If they wanted to destroy us, they could have attacked immediately while we were unprepared." As if summoned by her question, every display in the council chambers activated simultaneously. The same voice that had delivered the previous broadcast filled the room, but this time there was a face to accompany it. Elena Vasquez appeared on screen, wearing the uniform of an organization that shouldn't have existed. Behind her stood a bridge filled with humans working at stations that looked nothing like council technology, yet somehow seemed more advanced. "Honorable members of the Galactic High Council," she began, her voice carrying a formal courtesy that was somehow more threatening than any rage could have been. "I am Commander Elena Vasquez of the Human Liberation Fleet. We need to talk." Zelthros stepped forward, his form blazing with indignation. "You dare address this council as if you were our equals. You are criminals and terrorists who will what?" Elena interrupted calmly. "Be scattered to labor camps? Have our families sterilized? Watch our children die in your processing facilities? Counselor, we have nothing left to lose, which makes us extremely dangerous." She gestured, and the display behind her changed to show a tactical overview of the galaxy. Council facilities were marked in red, human ships in blue. The blue dots outnumbered the red by a significant margin. "Over the past 50 years, you've made one critical error in your assessment of humanity. You assumed that because we submitted to your conquest, we had accepted your authority. You couldn't comprehend that a species might choose temporary subjugation as a strategy rather than a surrender." The display zoomed in on specific systems, showing council installations surrounded by human vessels. Every major military base, every research facility, every production center you possess is currently within range of our weapons. We could destroy your entire civilization within the next 6 hours. "Then why haven't you?" Councillor Dines demanded, her luminary form pulsing with agitation. "What do you want?" Elena's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. "What we've always wanted. The right to exist as free beings. The return of our homeworld. The release of all humans from forced labor. And reparations for 50 years of systematic genocide." The council members exchanged glances. The demands were impossible to meet without fundamentally altering the structure of galactic society. The human population had been scattered across hundreds of worlds, integrated into the economic systems of dozens of different civilizations. Returning them to independence would collapse entire sectors of the galactic economy. "Impossible," Zelthros declared. "The disruption would be considerable," Elena agreed, "but considerably less disruptive than the alternative." The display changed again, showing technical specifications that made the assembled council members recoil in shock. They were looking at weapons systems based on principles of physics they barely understood, capable of effects that violated everything they thought they knew about the nature of reality. "This is a quantum cascade disruptor," Elena explained with the patience of a teacher addressing slow students. "When activated, it creates a chain reaction in the quantum foam that underlies space-time itself. The effect propagates at faster than light speeds,
causing the collapse of any technology based on quantum field manipulation. The implications were staggering. Every piece of advanced technology in the galaxy relied on quantum effects. Their ships, their computers, their weapons, their life support systems, all of it would simply stop working. "You're talking about the collapse of galactic civilization," Admiral HFY said, his mandibles clicking with horror.
"Billions would die, yes," Elena replied simply.
"Which is why we're hoping you'll choose the alternative." Counselor Morvek leaned forward, his massive form casting shadows across the chamber. "You're bluffing. No species would commit universal genocide, not even humans." Elena's smile was sad and terrible. "You clearly haven't been paying attention.
Human history is full of people who chose to bring down entire civilizations, rather than continue living under oppression. We call them martyrs, and we remember them as heroes."
She gestured again, and the display showed images that froze the council members in place. Earth as it had been before their conquest, blue skies, green forests, vast cities where humans had built monuments to beauty rather than utility. Then the same world as it appeared now, a barren rock covered with automated mining facilities and Vrak breeding centers. You destroyed our world and scattered our people across the galaxy as slaves. You sterilized our women to control our population. You murdered our children when they showed signs of intellectual independence. You turned our greatest minds into maintenance workers and our strongest bodies into pack animals. Her voice grew harder with each word. And then you had the audacity to execute a 19-year-old boy on live broadcast for the crime of fighting back. Did you really think we would just accept that? The silence in the chamber stretched for long moments before Counselor Zelthros spoke. "What assurance do we have that you won't use these weapons regardless of our decision?" "None whatsoever," Elena admitted. "We've learned from our previous mistake of trusting alien promises. This time we're relying on something more reliable than your word, your sense of self-preservation." She leaned forward, and for the first time the council members could see the burning intensity that marked her as Marcus Chen's spiritual successor. "But I will make you one promise. If you choose to fight us, if you decide that maintaining your power is worth risking universal destruction, then we will ensure that humanity's final act is to drag your entire civilization into oblivion with us." The transmission ended, leaving the council in stunned silence. 3 days later, Admiral HFY stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the human fleet that had taken position around the Vrak homeworld. His orders were clear: test the humans' resolve by attempting to break the blockade of the most heavily defended system in the galaxy. The Vrak Imperial Navy had assembled the largest battle fleet in its history. 2,000 ships equipped with the most advanced weapons technology available, supported by orbital defense platforms that could theoretically destroy entire attack fleets single-handedly. It should have been a massacre. The humans were outnumbered 4-1, and their ships were built from salvaged components and improvised systems. No military doctrine in the galaxy suggested they had any chance of victory. The battle lasted exactly 17 minutes. The humans opened fire first, but not with any weapons the Vrak recognized. Instead of energy beams or projectiles, they launched something that looked like small metallic spheres. The Vrak point defense systems ignored them completely. They were too small and moving too slowly to be considered threats. The spheres detonated when they came within a few kilometers of the Vrak ships, but they didn't explode in any conventional sense. Instead, they released clouds of what looked like metallic dust that spread rapidly through space. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then, the Vrak ships began experiencing cascading system failures. Their quantum drives shut down, their weapons stopped responding, their communication systems went dead. Within minutes, the entire Imperial fleet was drifting helplessly in space. "Nanomachines," Admiral Threxes whispered, as his own systems began failing. "They've weaponized nanotechnology." The tiny machines were designed to seek out and dismantle any technology based on quantum field effects. They were self-replicating, intelligent, and completely undetectable until activated. Worse, they were programmed to distinguish between Council technology and human systems, leaving the human ships completely unaffected. As his command ship went dark around him, HFY realized the terrible truth. The humans hadn't just achieved technological parity. They had surpassed every species in the galaxy by centuries. The surrender came 6 hours later. Elena Vasquez stood in the same chamber where Marcus Chen had been executed, but the atmosphere could not have been more different. Where once the gallery had been filled with alien dignitaries confident in their superiority, now it held the representatives of dozens of species who had come to witness the signing of the Galactic Accords. The terms were harsh but not genocidal. The council structure would be dissolved, replaced by a democratic federation, where every species had equal representation. All forced labor would end, with populations free to return to their homeworlds or establish new colonies. Reparations would be paid from the wealth the Council had accumulated over 3 millennia. Most importantly, Earth would be restored. The terraforming technology that had been used to strip mine the planet would be reversed, returning humanity's birth world to its former glory.
The age of empire is over, Elena announced as she signed the final document. Today begins the age of cooperation. Councillor Zelthros, his form now noticeably dimmed, approached her as the ceremony concluded.
"You could have destroyed us all," he said quietly. "Why didn't you?" Elena considered the question carefully before answering. "Because Marcus Chen didn't die to make us conquerors. He died to make us free."
"There's a difference." She looked up at the memorial that now stood where the execution platform had been. A simple stone bearing Marcus's name and final words. "Besides, we learned something important during our years of oppression. The galaxy is more interesting with diversity than without it.
We don't want to rule over other species. We just want the right to exist alongside them as equals." Zelthros nodded slowly. "Perhaps that is what we should have offered you 50 years ago." "Perhaps," Elena agreed. "But then we wouldn't have learned what we were truly capable of when pushed to our limits. And you wouldn't have learned what happens when you underestimate the capacity of any species to endure, adapt, and overcome." 5 years later, the first human children born on a restored Earth took their first steps on grass that grew in soil their grandparents had thought lost forever. Above them, ships from dozens of species traveled freely between worlds that were finally governed by consent rather than force. The galaxy had learned an important lesson about the dangers of oppression, and humanity had learned an equally important lesson about the responsibilities of power. Marcus Chen's execution had indeed changed everything, just not in the way anyone had expected.
In the end, his death had not sparked a war of vengeance, but a revolution of liberation that freed not just humanity, but every species that had suffered under the Council's rule. The young man who died believing he was striking a blow for human freedom had actually struck a blow for universal freedom.
His final words had proven prophetic in ways the Council could never have imagined. They truly had no idea what humans were capable of when pushed too far. But more importantly, they had no idea what humans were capable of when they chose to build rather than destroy, to liberate rather than conquer, to remember their humanity even in the face of ultimate power. The galaxy was a very different place now. In many ways, it was a better place, and in the gardens of New Geneva, the first city rebuilt on the restored Earth, a memorial stood to the boy whose death had changed everything. Children who would grow up free came there to read his story and learn the most important lesson of all, that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from defeating your enemies, but from refusing to become like them. Marcus Chen had died believing his sacrifice would mean something.
He had been right beyond his wildest dreams.